in a sort of not too formal way. Just a thought.
I'd just like to say I agree with that. And in terms of support, all I was suggesting actually was having a conversation with someone who used to work for Mori and therefore is more of an expert in how to do this sort of stuff and structure it in a way that you get decent responses and good engagement. There might be a cost of working out who you might approach, but I looked at that in my current job, and even on a county council wide level, it's in the low thousands. So in a village of Liss, I'm not sure it will be too high a cost. So I just wanted to have permission to explore that and see what it looked like in the first instance, really, rather than ruling it out.
Are others comfortable if there is an informal and very cheap conversation between Andy and his mate?
Yes, definitely. No.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
We know who it is. It's former councillor Katie. So she.
Oh, okay.
Mori.
Is she now working for Mori, or she used to?
She used to.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, look. I won't prolong this. I'm tempted to say, well, okay, let's agree to try and put on a single sheet of paper a proposal for how we may have community engagement, probably late autumn at the earliest, given the COVID situation, and see if we can agree on some things that we might actually do there. And we will build round what we want to do for the future around that. And in terms of an output, I frankly would like to come out with something that was no more than eventually 2 or 3 sides as basically the proposed way forward in terms of the things that we're going to give priority to. I don't want us to commit ourselves to writing some mammoth tome at all. I just can't see us doing that at the moment, nor will anybody read it, which is the problem. So if we could, I mean, I'll have if you like, a first stab, although I tend to be too wordy every time I write anything. And then circulate it around as a firm proposal for how we may engage with stakeholders, possibly set up focus groups, use whatever method there is in order to actually communicate to people. Is that okay if I share that?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Andy has can have a chat with Katie about a more formal method and whether it's worth it or not. Not that we have any money in the budget to actually do anything like Mori polling. And I have to say, in a village context, I'm slightly sceptical myself, but I'll hold fire on that until one hears what Katie has to say.
Shall I just, sorry, Roger, just to jump in, it's not Mori polling. What it would be essentially is there are companies that can give you, that you can pay to establish what a statistically significant sample that's demographically representative would look like in Liss, and then they will do the polling for you. So it's or give it to us to say, here's your list of people that you could approach, and this will be statistically significant. So it's potentially just a decent bit of evidence for us. So it wouldn't be a kind of full Mori poll or anything like that. So I'm not envisaging canvases on the streets or anything like that. It's kind of quite light touch as far as I understand it. So I just wanted to give a bit more flavour so people understand a bit more about what it is, really.
Well, have the conversation and report back to us then, in that case. Just
sorry, Chair,
yeah,
Chair,
sorry.
could I just in terms of sort of being encouraging to Peter Coley, would it be would the committee feel it okay for me just to float this in a very initial way with him, in case he is sort of thinking further with others about organising a Liss Life event? It seems a pity to miss, if there is going to be a Liss Life event, not to make this a bit of a, a central focus of it.
I would be up for that, yes. I mean, I had assumed that after Peter had got over his initial gloom that he would actually do it, have another attempt next year. And I think that would be extremely welcome. And there's no doubt that on the back of that, there are opportunities, I think, for communicating with people. So it's worth just, I think, from my point of view, at least just exploring that with people. No commitment, but at least exploring it. Okay. Could I just make a couple of remarks on finance, because
what have you done, Claire?
I think Roger's just frozen.
The way I feel about finance as well.
Where's Roger?
I think he's frozen. Is the man?
I sorted him out because he was talking about.
No, he's still showing us connected, so I don't quite know what's going on.
You think he's still talking?
Possibly.
No, you'll have to.
Oh, he's gone. No, he's gone.
Probably trying to rejoin because sometimes it does sort the problem out.
Give him a minute to come back.
Sarah? Hello, Sarah?
Yes.
Just, is there any way, easy way of sort of asking other parishes what sort of things they do, other than sort of having to go through every website?
I do have a network of... Yeah, I am part of a network of clerks, which is particularly useful this past week, faced with the opening of playgrounds. And yeah, we do often send around emails asking what others do in certain circumstances. Are you talking about different areas that they provide services in or focus on, invest in?
I wasn't thinking about them providing, although that would be the ultimate. I was thinking more in terms of being active in helping local groups or initiatives find funding from different sources. And I just thought that it would be really quite useful to be stimulated by what others have done, even though some of them may, for whatever reason, be so well resourced that they can do far more than we would aspire to. I just it might help us have some illustrations of the sort of thing Roger was talking about.
Yeah, I can certainly put something round to seek feedback from my group of contacts. Keith, do we know if Roger's trying to rejoin?
No, he hasn't reappeared yet.
He might be busy trying to find the login details again.
Yeah.
Maybe we should spend some of this infrastructure money on proper, honest to goodness internet connections.
What we could do is, while Roger's not here, he'll burst in on the scene in a moment. I too sort of feel a bit inclined to be questioning about the paying off of the pavilion money, and maybe being inspired by our current national leadership, who seem to be quite happy to saddle the population with the future generations with debt. But is anyone amongst the community feeling sort of cross that they're having to pay a little bit more in their council tax?
Speaking as a punter, when the original referendum-y thing came out asking if we'd be willing to up our council tax to pay for part of the pavilion, I can't remember if it's explicitly stated, but I remember thinking, oh, okay, so there will be money that comes in off the back of that, the Antlers Ash development that can be used to pay it off. I remember thinking that made it a little bit more palatable, but for the life of me, I can't remember if it was explicit.
Do you think that we should be perhaps asking, when we're asking about that?
if you ask, everyone's going to say yes, use it to pay off the pavilion so that our council tax. There's only one answer to that question.
Not necessarily, because if you say, would you rather we did this in the village or pay it off, they may be very attracted by the options. They actually know, I'd much rather carry on paying that, and that I'd rather that we invested in this particular highways area or whatever it may be. I think until they have the option, that you don't really know what they will say.
Fair enough.
Certainly people who've been asked recently whether they would pay a bit more tax to have a better NHS have said yes. I think obviously, the other options would have to look attractive. It's just that, if the only decision we were to reserve to ourselves to make without reference to the public were that one, it would seem a bit as though we were sort of fixing the agenda. Roger is now back with us, so I can tell him that I've been being an agent provocateur in his absence.
Absolutely fine. I apologise for disappearing for reasons I know not on this.
You were mid-flow and then you just froze, Roger. So.
All right. Well, that's what I do in life. Okay.
So we don't know what you think you said, and we may not have heard. You may have carried on speaking and we have no idea what was said.
When it stopped at your end, I think it stopped at my end, so I just stopped talking at that point. And I forget what I was saying. I would just.
You were talking about finance.
You were just about to talk about finance, and we thought Claire cut you off.
Oh, quite probably. But I think it's an important point. We've got to box clever about this, because we know SIL is there, but you don't know when. We're getting better at levering in other grant money, but you can never be sure until you've actually got it, and so on. So, as anybody who works in the public sector knows, you have to construct the way you put projects around being able to bid for money, really, not actually knowing whether you're going to get it or not, which is always the problem on this. Whereas in the past, we've tended to say, right, we'll put it in the budget, there it is, and it's secure. But actually, we're going to have to be cleverer than that in the future, I think.
Can I just jump in? Is that okay, Roger?
Yeah. You're not jumping in. Come in.
Okay. I completely agree with that, and I think we should aim to have we should aim to use our priority framework as a way to decide which projects we move forward on. But we should always seek to have a number of pipeline projects in development in each of the key spending areas that we've prioritized, because otherwise we are going to miss out on things. So on the highway side of things, I'm really keen to have projects that are worked up and in a place that could be submitted to bid for funding from other funding streams, or from the 75% of SIL money that's available to the park.
Yeah.
And ready to go in the next round and the round after, because otherwise we will miss out. If we spend all our time trying to build things for the round that we want to bid for, I think we won't be successful. So I'm really keen to have a number of pipeline projects that are in a fairly decent place, that you have a business case for, that's credible, that are agreed with the relevant authorities as deliverable. So as they kind of go in, we can then bid for SIL when they're successful, and we don't kind of have to wait years and years and years. Because I think where we've missed a trick on highways is actually we've not been thinking kind of long term and developing a pipeline. So we've kind of missed out in bidding for things and been scrabbling around. There may be options that come up that we could submit different bits of projects to. I also want to try and chunk things up. So on Village Centre, I think you would imagine there being a number of different projects that you could potentially bid under that umbrella to different places. So I just wanted to describe that, because I think actually it's almost better for us to have slightly too many projects worked up with a business case and on the stocks to submit than too few, given where we are in the way that the public sector works in bidding for money.
Okay.
I think that is really important, because sometimes pots become available with quite a short deadline, as we know with the Pocket Park proposal. So if a deadline comes up, there's a pot of money that I need to get rid of quite quickly, and we've got something that fits that, then we're ready to go, and we may miss the opportunity if we don't have something ready to go.
Okay, okay. How does that relate to what the individual committees are doing, highways and facilities in particular? Because they're obviously working in their own areas. I mean, it seems to me this group is there to take an overview, particularly of financing and of overall priorities. But that's not meant to stop highways looking at highways, and it's not all facilities to look at facilities. So I'm not quite clear how we just make that work.
So the way that I think it would work, the way that highways would own the highways bits of this stuff. So we will look at what as a committee we think is important, and we will be tasked with doing some of that stuff through the priorities that come down. So actually, when we have the priorities from the public, we can say, actually, we understand this in the context of the priorities for the public, the neighbourhood plan, the village design statement, and our action plan, and we will work out projects that fit with that. So at the moment, Highways Committee has picked its priority projects based on the village design statement, the neighbourhood plan, and our action plan. So we are looking at gateways, which are about kind of encouraging a kind of Liss identity, managing speeding and decluttering. We're looking at speeding in 2 locations, hopefully, following an email that I've sent around, and village centre and improving the village centre, which is very strongly referenced in the neighbourhood plan. So we're taking our cues from documents and prioritisation that the council has already set for us. I would expect if we came up with something completely left field from the Highways Committee, I'd expect us to pitch it to this committee and saying, actually, from everything we're seeing, we think this should be a priority, and that's why. But actually, everything that everything that I'd say the committee is trying to deliver at the moment, I can point back at one of our action plan or the neighbourhood plan and say that's where it links back to it.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful on this. Because anyway, no major project is going to go forward simply on the say-so of an individual committee. Both this group will look at it, but then council will have the final decision. And it's important to bear that in mind on these things. Okay.
Sorry, could I just a thought? Should we, not immediate, but before we have actual consultation, say at this event or events in the village hall, ask the committees to consider what their priorities might be. I'm just thinking that if we don't include them in whatever participation takes place at those meetings, then we won't have any sort of public reflection on them. So I'm thinking, as well as the ones that Andy has set out in his recent email, there was, before we sort of got locked down, some thought about allotments as a community asset as opposed to just for individual users or gardeners. And obviously with David having resigned, it's quite difficult to ask the committee at the moment, but it might be useful to get a view from facilities about sort of visionary ideas for the future.
Okay, sorry, somebody else wanted to say something? What I was going to suggest then as a process here, I think whether it's the autumn or whenever, we put some sort of priorities for the future, first stab at them, to a meeting of stakeholders, and perhaps share that in other ways with websites or focus groups. We need to think that through a bit more. But in building that, we have an internal process first, in which we're basically saying to all the committees and others, what do you think our priorities should be for the future on this? So come the autumn, we've got something which is there for discussion. We may try and structure it in the way that Keith was saying, in terms of choices. We can have a look at that. But what we're saying is we're committing ourselves to a process that probably won't deliver until well into next year, rather than saying we're going to do something that's going to immediately sort out all our priorities. So that's one part of what I take as coming out of this discussion, and I can have a first stab at something and circulate it to everybody about what that actually looks like as a bit of process, coming out with something for the autumn, if that's helpful to people. But that means, secondly, though, we are, and I at this point shift on to item 6, we have got a certain number of things in the pipeline, and I do just want to touch upon them because they're quite important on this. I listed some of the ones there which I knew were current. What I didn't include, which I should have done, is of course we have the Flood Action Group, who are still keen for us supporting what they're doing, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. And also the schools and the issues around the schools has now generated an awful lot of interest and activity. I'm slightly tempted to say we've been there before, but nevertheless, that has almost become a project in its own right, in terms of moving that forward, which we need to think about. Plus one or two other smaller things which are already, I think, in the pipeline, sorting out things like drainage at Newman Collard. I think, Andy, you're well on the way to work on the village gateways and taking them forward. But even something like that, one needs to be absolutely sure that we've got the funding in place before it can go ahead. I'll just mention some of the ones that slightly, not concern me, it's the wrong word, but the village centre improvement is potentially a big project. And you've just now, Andy, come up with a brief, which I think Liz has circulated today, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I think that is something that we need to find a way, perhaps this group or indeed the entire council needs to look at, because it has quite broad implications. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would agree with that, and I think the whole point of the document is to try and start that work off. So yeah. We've had as a council a long-held ambition to do something about the village centre, but we've never managed to turn that into a set of deliverable propositions. So I think what I am hoping with the Highways Committee to do via that document and with consultants potentially is working out what our actual ambition is and turning that into a number of projects that are on the shelf ready to bid into funding opportunities as and when they come up, either from SIL, from the park for 75%, or from the local enterprise partnership, which will be no doubt looking at how to kind of restore and allow villages to recover, or other things that come up from HCC and EHDC or any other place. So it's really just trying to, what I see is this document would hopefully give us a view of what we want from the village centre, and then a number of bespoke projects to bid into things as we see come forward. Okay, and how did you see that being? Did you see that going to council for a discussion or what? Yeah, absolutely. So the document would need to go to council for a discussion, ultimately, because we will need to put some sort of funding against it if we're going to pay someone to help us do it. And in order to develop propositions that are credible with the park and with HCC, we're going to have some help working out what the technical aspects of things look like. So absolutely, I would see it going to council with a request for funding in due course. I actually wanted to share it with the Highways Committee in the first instance to let people know where we got to with it and seek comments from the committee before taking it forward.
Can you seek comments from this group at the same time?
I'm just looking who's not on Highways Committee and hasn't got it copied. I think everyone's already. Didn't you get it? Claire, did she not copy? Okay, I'll forward it to Claire, and then everyone's covered. Absolutely, not a problem.
Well, it would be good if people looked at it, if they're on highways, from a highways point of view, but also I'd like people to look at it from a broader point of view, from the point of view of this group, as to whether that makes sense, how it actually works for us. Not just the current funding, but actually where that's taking us in the future as well. Okay. I just mentioned in passing very quickly, the toilets in Village Hall, we have funding by and large, but it keeps nibbling at the edges. There are little bits that keep coming forward, which I think is causing Sarah to tear her hair out over. And which, as a result of that, we're dipping into the maintenance budget of the Village Hall. That may actually be a bit of a problem for us if we go on doing like that. So can I just, I won't go into a detailed discussion of the figures, but just be warned, we may need to prop up that bit of the budget by taking the remaining bit of SIL that we've actually got, which is another 5,000 or so in that direction. But I will leave Sarah to actually take a paper, probably to full council is the easiest way of doing it. Is that okay, Sarah?
Yeah, it's not just about the toilets. A lot of it stems from the full structural condition survey of the Village Hall that we had done a few weeks ago, and that's given rise to several areas of works that are needed, such as the roof, gutterings, chimney, and I've got some approximate cost figures. And we definitely need what's in the budget plus what's in the allocated reserves. And I would like to see the £5,000 we've got in SIL already available to us. I'd like to see that put towards Village Hall and maintenance, essentially. If we don't, then we're at risk of not being able to continue to maintain the assets, which has got to be a priority, maintaining existing assets.
Right. Well, if the group is happy, then I think if you prepare a note for council on that, setting out the money, that would be helpful.
Yeah, will do.
Could I just re-raise the issue that I initiated the discussion on while you were absent, Roger?
Okay. Yes.
It's just to come back to this issue of paying off the loan for the pavilion.
Yeah.
And I quite understand that we've got to keep the Village Hall to be serviceable and pleasant to be in, but that would mean, that we would be committing to that and to potentially to paying off some of the pavilion loan. And I'm just wondering, the question I'd raised was, would residents be willing to continue to pay a bit more on their council tax? And that led me to sort of suggest that we should be at least giving that as an option when we consult. But the other thought is, as I recall, we were getting before lockdown, the income from the pavilion was better than we'd expected. And I just wonder whether we should also be looking at reviewing what we've learned so far from the initial successful months of the pavilion's operation as part of considering how much or whether we start paying off the loan.
We'd always said that towards the end of the first year of operation, we would do quite a full assessment of both income and expenditure on the pavilion. That has now been knocked back a bit by the lockdown and so on. The principle is still there, I think, and we do need to try and get a handle on that. I think, and Liz, the RFO, is aware of this, that we need to do that. I wonder whether Sarah can comment what she thinks we can actually do on that still.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is this about using excess income to instead of?
It's about what we had said, that when the pavilion had been operating for a year, we would do a thorough assessment of the costs and the income that we got from there. So we had a better view for the future than we do at the moment, because frankly, it was a guess when we first opened the pavilion as to how much it would actually cost. Now, I think Liz has done some of that work, but of course it was affected by the lockdown. So I'm not sure how much that's really been completed.
So the work on actual running costs?
Yes, running
that has
costs,
been completed. That has been completed.
Yeah. And setting that against a view of future income on the basis of what we learned in the first year.
Yeah, the work on actual running costs has been completed, but she hasn't looked at the accurate projection of, or a better assessment of income over the next year. We haven't gone that step further, but it wouldn't be too difficult to do based on what we'd received already for the part of the year it was in operation.
I mean, it's something for fine,
done.
But I do think it's something that's essential that we have a stab at sort of completing the circle on
Yeah.
that.
I'll speak to Liz. I think it'd be quite straightforward to do.
Is that all right with you, Claire?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, good.
I know it's something that's going to be quite difficult to predict, even if COVID goes away tomorrow and we're allowed to open up completely. We don't know if people will come back.
No, this is the problem, and it may not be the same pattern. And certain activities may not come back, if at all. Certainly not for a long time.
That is the real problem.
It's really difficult to predict. I mean, everybody could decide that once they're let out, then absolutely, let's get out there and do all of the things that we used to do, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
The best we can do at the moment is work on last year's picture. I think look at we've got the assessment of running costs, and we could look at the income should COVID not have happened. See where we stand then.
Yeah, and just run sensitivities about whether it'll be 75% or 50 or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
To make my proposition, I would like to think that when we get the first substantial tranche of COVID money, we can demonstrate, one or two examples of using it for new things, and maybe if we find that we're in difficulties with the pavilion fund, the overall sort of sustainability, we would keep that in reserve for a later payment rather than rushing to pay off a great chunk of the loan and not having any new initiatives. That would be my proposition.
Yeah, I can see that, Nick, entirely. Okay. Just to note some of the other things were actually in the pipeline. The Mill Road Community Garden, for which we have got funding, though I'm not clear whether it's totally adequate or not, has a number of other issues to do with land and so on to be resolved. But effectively, the council's committed itself to that. Is that right, Sarah? We have a clear decision to go ahead on that.
Still muted. Sorry, still muted. Yes, it's in the action plan as a priority, so it has been agreed by council.
On that, and we've still got a bid in on the West Liss play and recreation equipment.
We do. I think we'll know the outcome in the autumn.
Yeah, on that. Just turn to highways. I noticed that you've got the gateways I mentioned, and also we've got a growing area around the schools on that. Neither, and I think the gateways has been, agreed previously. The schools is the new dimensions coming to this. Although, as I said, I attempted to say we've been there before. Where do you think that's going to go, Andy? Do we need to turn that into a project, or what?
I would say we don't need the schools to be a project. I think we need to bring the schools into the broader speeding conversation that we're having at highways anyway. So speeding and speeding reduction has been a highways priority on the action plan for a little while. The first place we were going to look at that was on Forest Road. It feels to me like Hillbrow Road outside the school is the next place to bring the engineers in to look at, see what we can do. And again, this is all very much about getting a pipeline of projects to be prioritized when we have the money to do it. So I don't see the school as a specific project. I actually see probably engaging with the school as a specific task for someone, like we might want to do with other key village stakeholders. You know, maybe have a parish council owner for the relationship with the school. I'm quite happy to pick that up, given I've started talking to Mrs. Myers now. Ian has stepped away from the council, and one of my daughters is still at the school for a little while. But I don't think it's a specific. I don't think there's the project or a kind of promise for money. I think it's more the Hillbrow Road route than the school, to be honest with you.
Sorry, just to say on that, on Thursday lunchtime, there was a engineer from Hampshire County Council by the new crossing, spray painting marks onto the tarmac, but I'm not quite sure what he was spray painting for, but he was definitely spray painting marks on the tarmac. So hopefully that means something's going to happen.
Can I, thank you for that. Can I pick up a particular point that Andy said? I think it would be very helpful if there was a member of the council who, if you like, owned the school's travel and transport issue. And we saw that person who has been the prime conduit to the school on travel and transport matters. Do others think that's useful?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite comfortable if Andy is prepared to take that on. We can touch that on that again at council, Sarah, if you just note that. But I think it would be very useful. I mean, I think as a way of working, we tend to do an awful lot through committees, but actually there is a lot for individual councillors if they are willing to own particular things. And I'm grateful for Nick has certain parts of the social agenda, for example.
Yes, I think.
Leanne, hello.
Hello, Roger. Really sorry, I had some problems getting on. I was just about to give up, thinking you'd be finished.
All right, okay. I stand to be advised on this. I'm very happy for you to join the meeting, but I'm not quite clear whether you're allowed to do so at this stage. Sarah, do we know? Keith?
I don't see any problem. I don't think
right,
so.
okay.
I just possibly, Roger, the only thing we should do is get Leanne to do the declaration that we all have to do on who we are and would be of any interest.
Yes, indeed. Leanne, I don't know whether you saw the piece of paper circulated by, or the email circulated by Sarah this afternoon, which gave the wording for the declaration of interest.
Yes, I wrote it down actually. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, can you go ahead, please?
I, Leanne MacDonald, am a parish councillor of Liss Parish Council. I confirm that I have read the agenda and have no interest to declare in any of the items being considered this evening.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We are actually just at the moment just reviewing where we are on projects at the moment. We've talked about the future and how we look to trying to find future priorities, and I won't go over that again, I'm afraid, Leanne. But we
That's
are just
That's fine.
We're just looking where we are now. One of the things that came up at the council meeting last time was the flood action group.
Roger.
Oh, I was going to say, before we move on, could I just finish on highways, and then Nick looks like he wants.
Yeah, I apologise. Go ahead, Andy. You finish off on highways, then I'll go to.
So the only other thing that I wanted to say is on the village gateway work. We are actually looking to fund that not through SEAL, but through what old 106 money that is burning a hole in the SDMP's pocket and is likely to be clawed back. My understanding from the SDMP and HCC officers is that all of that all of the gateways that we have an ambition to deliver should be fundable through the existing 106 money, and there may be some left over. So that is the working assumption of kind of me and the committee at the moment. If it changes, then obviously the committee will look to prioritise locations and we'll come back to council and report back. But I just wanted to say, actually, we are looking to solve a problem with money that's there and at risk of being clawed back, rather than trying to kind of compete for SIL money on the gateway side of things.
Thank you for that. Yes, I was aware, but it's good to have that recorded. Nick.
I just wanted to make a comment about the school, the issue of Hillbrow Road versus Forest Road in Liss Forest. I think Forest Road sort of has got in there first, but I wouldn't want us to assume it should have greater priority than Hillbrow Road. And I think, having had a near miss accident, we should actually adopt the proposition that Andy was making earlier, that we should have projects that we want to do but don't necessarily have all the funding for on our list, and then get those things done that we can get funding for. So, for example, if Andy comes up with some propositions in discussion with the schools, and we can see that we can get that funded before something in Liss Forest, then that would be fine. I don't know if Andy would agree with that.
I would absolutely agree with that. So the way I would quite like to work for us as a committee and in our kind of operational committees that are kind of doing the thinking around this is that we like I said, develop a pipeline of projects that are more than we know we can fund, which we can then prioritise in this committee to go forward for SIL bids, and then knock off once we've delivered, and then bring things up so there's a flow through of worked up projects. Because if we do not have that, I think we will miss an opportunity with external funding.
Okay. Others comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Fine. Good. Okay. Right. I will just mention the flood action group, or in fact, actually not so much the flood action group, which is really the group monitoring flooding in the village. There's the Arun and Rother Rivers Trust, who, if you recall, have put a proposition to us that they want us to help fund a scoping study for the upper reaches of the Rother, with a view in the longer term to do some natural flood management work there to basically slow down the rate at which water drains down the river and thereby relieve potential flooding. It's undoubtedly a worthwhile activity, but we've always been slightly sceptical because they basically said they want £8,000 odd from us, without really showing how they've looked at others who can help fund it, and without really showing where it's going to go after that, because this is only the scoping study. So what happens next? You know, where's the funding for that? Having said that, while slightly skeptical about it, the last thing I want to do is just say no to them. So if people are comfortable, I'm prepared to go and continue a dialogue with them about the way forward on this. See if we can perhaps reshape their proposal, and with a clearer view of how it may be funded in the longer term, when beyond the scoping study, how they're going to fund the actual work which takes place there. Because there's no point us or anybody just funding a scoping study unless there's some prospect of where that's going beyond that. So I don't want to abandon them entirely, and I'm offering to have a conversation with them to see where we can take that. One's already said to them, we do not have money in the budget, and as such, and it probably is not money that would qualify for SIL. They've already looked at that. So it may be something for next year rather than this year, which, because of COVID and so on, is probably the reality of life anyway. So if you're all comfortable, I will continue a dialogue and then report back.
Roger, I am comfortable. I think it's worth acknowledging as a committee as well that actually there will be some occasions where we do need to invest some revenue funding from the parish council in order to work up bids for capital funding from SIL and other sources as well. So, you know, if we are looking to leverage it in sort of tens of thousands of pounds or more, then we're going to have to probably spend a little bit of money to put in bids that are credible. And the flood action work is an example of that, actually. If we can get a solution that shows that we can mitigate flood risk along the Rother in Liss through this work, then actually it's a worthwhile investment if it can leverage in money from SIL or kind of EA money to prevent flooding.
Okay. I'll bring this meeting to an end shortly, but I just end with a last question at item 6. Is there anything else which, say, over the next year, perhaps we ought to be looking at? Given the fact we're going to look at the longer term prioritisation, but is there anything that comes to people's mind that's been overlooked or has been suggested that is worth having a look at?
Yeah. I'm assuming we had a discussion about consultations.
Yes, we have. We're looking at possibly a stakeholder meeting and 1 or 2 other things, possibly focus groups, something anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. And I won't repeat that, but I'm quite happy to talk to you about it later.
Yeah, thank you.
Any areas we're not
Roger, on your list, there's no drainage. You talked about the drainage works, but it's not actually listed on the agenda.
That not financed at all then? It's which drainage work is this? We've done the investigation work.
We intend to apply for Section 106 funds. That's been through council already. So it's an ongoing project, but there are funds available for parish council to use, yes.
Well, I
same with the toilet refurb.
Yes, I would assume that effectively a decision had been taken to pursue that. After all, that it does need it. That's not in dispute.
Yeah, no, I agree. It comes in the same category as the toilet refurb. That it's in hand. It's the funds are there, or we think we know we can get them and secure the relevant funds. So it comes in the same category as individual toilets. But I just note that it was not in your list.
Okay, that's fine. We can add that to the list. I'm really looking. I don't want to go and spend money. We haven't got any extra money, but I just want to be sure that there isn't something that really we ought to be starting to look at now rather than wait until a future list of priorities.
A couple of thoughts. I mean, one is actually something to take off the list. Presumably we can now take the men's shed off the list.
Yes, I mean, financially, well, we now know that the men's shed is probably more going to be the responsibility of the trust than ourselves, and the discussion is mainly with them. Although, just to note the caveat, we need to ensure that we still maintain provision for our groundsmen there on that. But it's not going to be something that I think we're going to need, for example, to put a significant finance into or anything of that sort. And I think as a council, we've already said we are very supportive of the idea. So yes, I think that's well on its way.
I think where I would see it is we are making way to enable them to flourish.
Yes.
And they're going to do the investment. The thought, the more sort of positive thought was just this issue of allotments, about which I have absolutely no expertise, but I was sort of stimulated by a Petersfield Post article, which says there's been a sort of absolute upsurge of allotmenting in Petersfield and Sheet. And I just wondered whether this was also the case in Liss, and whether we could somehow capture the thoughts that were going on before lockdown about having some parts of our allotment estate for community projects. But I think it was really David who was thinking most about this, and we perhaps need to ask him at least to leave us a legacy of his ideas.
I believe it was discussed at the last facilities committee and recorded in the minutes that it would be pursued. I don't recall who was going to pursue it, and I think it did fall by the wayside because of the restrictions. But it was certainly agreed by facilities that it would be pursued. And yes, there has been quite an uptake in allotments. Vacant plots have been flying off the shelf.
And aren't those two contradictory? Because I got the impression from David that he saw the idea of some community use reflected the fact he thought there were some plots that weren't being used, and therefore there was the potential to actually use them for a community use rather than individuals.
Yes, there's a couple that have been earmarked, I would say. So we haven't been letting those. They haven't been on the vacant list because they have been earmarked for that potential community plot. So that hasn't ruled out. We haven't let the plots that we could have used for that.
Well, I mean, A, I read the item, but B, Watches Gardener's World and various other things in which the idea of community use of allotments clearly is very much in vogue. And I would quite like, I must say personally, to see something of that sort. Can we relook at who is owning the action from facilities to see we don't lose sight of that?
Yeah, I thought we were going to approach the Scouts.
Are they good at growing things?
Well, I don't know, but maybe they could try. I just thought we'd agreed that we were going to offer it to the Scouts.
Okay. Oh, right.
I don't recall that. I recall that somebody had a dialogue with somebody who was interested in starting it up, but I don't recall who it was.
Well,
but I'd look into it.
Rather than this group duplicating what's been discussed elsewhere, we'll just note that we try and pin down the action point on that.
Okay. I will volunteer, if I may, to work with Sarah on that. I think it's actually one of the men's shed community who had the bright idea, so we may be able to tap into them.
Oh,
I think that's right. Yeah.
And again, you know, it's part of a general point about us working with groups in the community. I think on issues like that would be useful. Okay, I was going to draw this discussion to a close, conscious that it's slightly unsatisfactory in that it's being quite generalized as a first meeting often is. But just to summarize, I do think...
sorry, Roger, you asked about priorities, and I just wanted to say, is Village Hall renovation beyond the toilets on a priority? So not just maintenance, as in terms of fixing the roof so it doesn't leak and painting the guttering so they don't fall off, but in terms of trying to upgrade it to a kind of pavilion level of quality. I'm not arguing for it either way. I'm just asking the question.
Well, I think it's worth looking at because the Village Hall is now beginning to look tired. But there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And we've got to start to think, where is it going in the future? So at some point or other, somebody needs to scribble a few words down on a piece of paper with a few thoughts of that. Eventually, much further down the road, somebody's probably going to have to do some decisions about what we want to do and how much is that going to cost. We haven't got that yet, but I would quite welcome anybody who was willing to sort of kick off a bit of a discussion on that by perhaps writing a note about the sorts of things that we may or may not choose to do.
I might have a go at that, but it would need to be on the priority list as a pipeline. Maybe we need a pipeline projects list as well or something.
Nothing is going to happen on that immediately this year. That's definitely something for the future.
No, so I understand that, but the problem is I find it quite difficult to work on a project that hasn't got any kind of endorsement from the council and then bring something forward and then be told, actually, this is not of interest to this organisation. Why have you written all this work and done all this research? So there's a bit about authority to, like, meaningful authority to kick something off.
Well,
I'm not being funny, it's just an observation.
But if this group feels it's worth doing a bit of preliminary work to start thinking about what we're doing with the Village Hall, then if this group is happy for Andy to do that, that to me is authority to do it. This
I
is
have
up.
lots of figures already. I have a whole sheet here with works. It's all stemming from the structural survey. For example, internal decorations I've got here within 12 to 18 months. So that's, I'll put here that needed for budget 21-22. So I'm already starting to look at that as a result of the structural report, because it's all about maintaining our assets and just general maintenance, which goes further than just fixing the roof. It does start straying into internal decoration.
At a minimal level, there is about just maintaining our asset as it is. But then you can ask questions about the fact that if it's looking a bit tired and so on, and old-fashioned, we're upgrading the toilets, and we've done the disabled toilet and so on. Should we be starting to think about other things as well? And just to explain what some of the options are without costing them anything of that sort, but just actually showing what some of the choices might be.
Just on those figures there, are you able to circulate those before Monday? Because I'm conscious we've got a finance committee meeting Monday night, so it'd be quite good to be able to see what figures we're talking.
Yeah, I can circulate them immediately after the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Would it be possible when we're looking at the pavilion figures to also look at the village hall figures? I'm just not conscious of how has the pavilion affected usage and income or not. You know, thinking very radically, you know, are we sure that we need a village hall? Could we have our meetings in other places? Rather depends on other uses to which it is put or could be put. I'm sorry, I'm just as we're late in the meeting, I'm being a bit provocative now. I think
fair enough.
Just because we've got an asset doesn't mean we necessarily keep it. I used to say when I was more closely involved with East Hampshire District Council that you know, it might be a good idea to sell off their wonderful space, if not buildings.
Is there anything in the deeds? Is there anything in the deeds that might prevent that? Maybe we need to have a look at that.
I think there is, because I know it was given by I think it was the Money Coots family, wasn't it, to the village?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think thinking way back in the annals of time, there was a pavilion meeting where we bandied around the idea of what if we sold the village hall for redevelopment, on the grounds that then we could use that money to fund a brand new pavilion. It was when we were thinking bigger than the pavilion that we've got now. And I believe I'm right in saying that the lawyers found that there was something in the deeds that said we could never sell it.
Well, so let's get sidetracked into that conversation, but I think the general point about just asking questions,
yeah,
it is worth doing it. Just this is a preliminary start, just starting off the conversation.
Yeah.
So if you're prepared to do that, Andy, that would be useful. Okay, so we will try and describe a longer term process for priorities for the future and involving community involvement, and one will try and set that on a piece of paper, circulate that. If people are happy with that, then that will dictate a process for the future. In the meantime, one will try and keep everybody up to date how the funding for all the current proposals is going. Andy's going to pick up points both on the village hall and on the schools. I will pick up the flood issue. And these are particular things where there at the moment there's no end quite clearly, which is why they need somebody particularly to actually live with them. The other things I think will probably come to us in the normal way as we're looking at the budgeting. And some of them are clearly there only if they get grant money, for example, the play and recreation equipment. And we just need to keep an eye on how that goes. Right, I was not going to set another meeting until another 3 months or so, unless people feel there's a need for something urgent. Or do I just see how we go?
My vote would be to do it sooner, just to keep the momentum going.
Okay.
Just to be, you know, perhaps having got the sort of framework, maybe to share creative thoughts as we go along.
Support for that view?
Yes, yes, I support that.
Good. Okay, let's do that then. And finally, just on the membership of the group, one has to think of somebody. Well, we need to find a new chairman of facilities since David has sadly resigned, and they will become a member of this group. The other person who was on this group is Ian James, who's also resigned sadly. However, Ian has asked whether we might consider co-opting him onto the group, because we are allowed to co-opt non-councillors. I'm actually not going to ask for an immediate decision on that, because I've literally only seen the email from him this afternoon on that. And it is slightly odd to resign and then immediately ask to be sort of reinstated on one of the groups. But I do, just to note that Ian is still interested in the work of the group for the future. Okay, if that's it, thank you everybody. It's always very difficult. I find particularly meetings which are slightly more discursive, it's quite difficult to do by Zoom, I find. But I think at least we are setting down some routes for getting going. Thank you.
Okay.